In what ways does Israel's expanded security zone in southern Gaza further endanger the already collapsing humanitarian systems in the enclave?
Of course, this matter is no longer a concern for Israel regarding the humanitarian situation and the deteriorated security situation. Israel decided to expand the genocide operation since last month and establishing buffer zones, as stated by the Israeli defense minister, creating more and more buffer zones in southern Gaza to reshape the enclave on one side and create a new reality to continue the Israeli occupation for good, which indicate, and there is a rejection by Netanyahu and the far right government to go back to the negotiation for a ceasefire. It's now completely ruled out what's happening in the Gaza Strip by the Israeli troops and occupying the Mirage corridor and the Philadelphia corridor confirms that Netanyahu wants to create a new reality in Gaza in an attempt to partition the Gaza Strip into isolated area to dismantle the Palestinian population presence to end any attempts for an independent Palestinian state in the future.
Yeah, and speaking of this new reality and based on the UN's latest warning, how imminent is Gaza's total collapse of vital services like food, water, and also medical care?
Of course, the international organizations during the past 4 days issued a number of reports stating that Gaza is living the worst humanitarian catastrophe and it is now a death trap, and there is a painful reality in the Gaza Strip. For more than 2 months now, all the border crossings are closed and no trucks are allowed in carrying humanitarian aid and relief. Even regarding medical staff and medical convoys, Israel is hindering their access to continue the starvation policy against the Palestinian population and forcing them to evacuate for forced displacement, which will create a high degree of forcing the Palestinians out of their lands, to lead them out of the lands, which is the desire of Netanyahu and Smotrich to make the enclave uninhabitable with this new reality. And I see this will be very difficult because this will threaten the entire region.
Now, with Israel militarizing nearly a third of Gaza, what are the short and long-term effects of this on the civilian life and displacement as well?
Unfortunately, there is Israeli control and occupation for 40% of the Gaza Strip area, and there is a systematic plan outlined by the Israeli government for isolating the Gaza Strip and turning it into a small isolated areas to continue the occupation, as they see what happened in the 2005, and the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip was a mistake that should not be repeated once again. And this is the intent to create a difficult reality to prompt the displacement, and that's why they are cutting electricity, water supplies, bombing medical facilities, and everything that, in addition to hindering any humanitarian aid access, to support this the harsh reality to push the Palestinians out of their lands, with rejecting all attempts to resume the negotiations or any attempt for the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza. Netanyahu, if he does this, it means the end of his government, and he will be held accountable in the charges raised against him.
Building on what you said, sir, with the farming and the groundwater access cut off, what realistic solutions remain to avert the widespread famine in Gaza?
This depends on the international pressures led by the US pressures. Now we are waiting for the last chance to save the day in the Gaza Strip. Trump, in his meeting with Trump last week in the White House, he gave Netanyahu 2 weeks to end the war and to resume the negotiations and find a way to exchange detainees between the two parties. Even Netanyahu told the families of the detainees that he has good news and there will be an exchange of detainees very soon, and there is a last chance by the US president visit next May to the Middle East. If the US used this opportunity to create more success and end the war in Gaza, I think this would be very beneficial to the entire region and for the Trump interests to economically and socially and politically.
Mm-hmm. Now, lastly, sir, delving into a legal perspective, if you can expand on how the current restrictions on humanitarian aid to Gaza amount to violations of international humanitarian law.
Of course, there are lawsuits before the ICC regarding criminalizing the Israeli actions for hindering any humanitarian aid access. And there was more than one lawsuit raised before the ICC, and as well as Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, criminalized Israel in a press conference last week in New York, and he said that these are practices in violation of the international humanitarian law, and all the international conventions sees these actions as crimes. These starvation and mass killing practices are criminalized according to all international norms, but now the US is standing as a hindrance before holding Netanyahu accountable for these actions.
From Cairo, that was Al-Ahram newspaper managing editor Ashraf Al-Ashry. Thank you so much for joining us here on Qnews.